minority faculty development program. And the state legislature had given SUNY system administration $500,000 a year to support this program. And initially it was constructed as an affirmative action program designed specifically to try to overcome lack of representation of populations from historically underrepresented groups. But what happened was SUNY wasn't using the money for that purpose. Someone had filed a suit against the university saying that this program discriminated against white faculty because it targeted Blacks and Latinos specifically for support. So SUNY, courageous and committed as it was to diversity, basically took the money and didn't pursue the program. The money went supposedly to the campuses to help them offset budget cuts that had been imposed. Fortunately, we were able to reactivate the program and redefine it in such a way that it overcame the supposed legal objections to it being used to target only specifically Black and Latino faculty. So we reactivated the program. We were able to hire across our four-year institutions and our research centers about 8 faculty members a year. We gave campuses a specific mandate. We said the hire has to do a couple of things. First of all, diversify faculty profile across the campus. Secondly, the university has to commit to making sure that the individual is reappointed, then that they'll be fairly evaluated for tenure, because we want to avoid this kind of revolving door. So we got all those commitments, and we also got buy-in that system administration will pay essentially for 3 years, salary and research support, declining every year, and then the campuses would take it on. So the program proved successful in my years. I left system administration after about 4 years, and my successor continued the program for a couple of years. But then last year, the program was basically shelved, and something else was presented called Prodigy. I don't know if you guys have heard that. It's another initiative of system administration to promote hires. So, and basically it's kind of a redo of what was originally established, except now there's a lot more oversight and regulations. And so system is much more involved in the actual process at the highest level. Before, it really was kind of a faculty initiative, although we had faculty across the system evaluating the applications. So there was a lot of collegial buy-in into the whole process. And that was important. It built credibility and made sure also that we had buy-in from different campuses, so we had a potential base of political support for the initiative. So I'm not sure how this Prodigy program is doing at the present time, but that's what I want to offer with respect to clarification regarding what Aaron said. And also, Aaron, thank you so much for doing this. This is really important. Good work.
It's my pleasure. I don't know if there's any sort of follow-up from the group to what Pedro just talked about. And one thing that jumps to my mind, and I'll be curious what this perspective on this too, is my limited sense of this, maybe others have a different experience, is that the loss of the diversity program that Pedro described was a real loss. I get the sense that the newer sort of Prodigy program is not accomplishing quite what the diversity program intended. But I was sort of struck by something that you said, which is that it sort of funded 9 positions a year or something to that effect, 8 or 9 positions across the entire SUNY system, which even among just the 4-year campuses, that's, what is it, 23, 25 campuses, something like that. And so it seems like an important initiative, but nevertheless still let's just say insufficient one, if what we're really talking about is really changing the diversity profile of the campus. And so, sorry, Idalia, please.
Yes, sorry, I'm Idalia. And thank you for having me. I do want to comment, make a small comment, and talking about insufficient. The effort on these programs, unfortunately, has been on recruiting and maintaining, being able to reappoint these members. But I think that where has been lacking is in the support campus level for these staff minorities that usually end up in campuses that are surrounded by either rural or mostly white communities, and they don't have the support in the community or on campus to stay. We have had, in Fredonia, we haven't had many, but the few that we have had have left because they don't find the support on campus or community. So I think that that's where I've seen where these programs, do bring them in, because as they're looking for jobs, and SUNY is an attractive, employer. But unfortunately, once we get them, I think that we fail on supporting them. And I don't know if there has been, where that falls, if it's in the the on-campus affirmative action or diversity now office, or I don't think that there's a committee on a commitment on campuses to actually support these faculty and staff, and I think that that's where you have lacking with these programs. However, how many programs you put out to recruit, if you don't support these people, they're going to leave after a few years. So I just wanted to comment that, because that has been the theme that we have seen all through these years. I've been at Fredonia for 29 years, and we can count with the with a few hands how many people we have, how many minority representatives we have, and of course the few that are left become burnt out, because they become there's a tokenism that you are the de facto minority representative in every committee and everything that that you need some representation, you're it, and it becomes a burden on these few that are left behind. So the support on campuses is a real issue.
If I could add to that, because I think Idalia's point is extremely important. And indeed, when this program was designed, one of the things we tried to do was annually to bring the recipients together, at least at system administration, to try to build kind of community of scholars and create kind of the infrastructure for them to sustain each other. It's a small initiative, but the idea was that they would then take the initiative through the support the system provided to build this community. And within our own campus, we sought to do that by reactivating something called the Center for Latin American Caribbean Studies. And the idea was to reach out to all faculty, not just Latino faculties, to participate in this process. We would hold seminars, and unfortunately, the funding was eliminated. So even an effort to create an alternative system to bring in faculty in the social science and humanities and who are interested in these issues on our campus failed. But your point about creating an environment that's supportive and conducive to retaining faculty of color is extremely important.
So if I can sort of see if we can build on this a bit, because it seems like, Idalia, what you pointed to in your comment was maybe two dimensions of thinking about support. So one side of it was, what are the things that a faculty of color actually would need to be successful, right? And then it also sounds like there's a set of things that we do that we would just want to stop doing, right? Like, for example, like just don't put me on every single committee, right, that needs a diverse person, right, to make. So I'm sort of curious, and if others have thoughts on this from their own experience, whether it's from this campus or beyond, what are the concrete things that we need to be doing? Like, what does support mean in practice? And then how can we put that practice into place through policies, procedures, shifts in organizational culture? Does somebody have an example of something that worked well from them, or something that they've seen in their own experience, a success, or an area that just is crying out that needs to be addressed? If anybody wants to take this one up here.
I'm sorry, I just want to add one of those things that people require. For example, in our campus, we had a faculty staff of color group, but it was just mostly us. There was no administration buy-in, there was nothing. So as simple as you know, I moved to a community, I'm a Black woman, I looked at a community that's mostly rural or white. Where do I go to get my hair done? Where do I go to get some essential, you know, things that I need as a person of color? So something as simple as that is lacking. And unfortunately, even into the same few that are there to take this on, you know, without the campus community support, it is something besides the tokenism that I mentioned before, like, you know, you are the token person on each of these groups, which is a function of the number of us. You know, if we are 5, that's all we have. So, and 5 is the big number here. But that's one of the few, you know, example of things that kind of support that I was mentioning. So,
Alycia, did you want to respond to this too, Alycia?
Yeah, I was just going to say that at least on the graduate student side, for graduate students that are employees, there's really like a lack of communication, I feel like, as far as like receiving support from the university, just through the process of like the new changes that have been implemented in response to COVID-19. We didn't really hear anything as like graduate assistants or teaching assistants as far as like what our preferences were as far as teaching or holding office hours, or how do we want to be involved in classes. So I didn't get any communication from my department. And that's kind of how I feel like my experience has been a little bit in the graduate side of things. I'm a Carson Carr Fellow, so I am receiving a scholarship, and I am working for the university particularly because they want to expand diversity within graduate students and then eventually faculty. But the reason why I hear that there's not more professors of color is because there's a lack of people with like a PhD that are people of color. So I feel like there's like a gap between being able to get to that point, a lack of access, and then when we're into the department, it feels kind of like we're just alone.
Thanks. Oh, here. Debora, looks like you have there you go.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Okay, now, yeah.
My hand up. Thank you for asking and for allowing me to be a part of this discussion. Just a little bit, I had a similar situation. My background, I'm a retired administrator with the New York State Education Department, but I came to Albany in 1989 as part of the Regents Management Fellowship Program for minorities. And the idea at that time was to bring diversity to the education department. And some of the things that you're talking about are similar to what those of us who went through that program experienced, because although the program, the qualifications required you to have a master's degree and at least 3 years experience, and all of us had more years, of us had a doctorate at that time, the individuals you would work with in the program areas we were assigned to looked at it as if we were getting special compensation. Why are you here? You're here because someone has done something special for you, not because of the credentials and the skills that you had. And we weren't there because there was something wrong with us. We were there because there was a department that needed to address issues within that department. It did not have the diversity that it needed to reflect the New York State and to reflect the needs of the students it was to serve and the population it was to serve. And so I think part of the issues that we saw then was when some of what you're talking about, the support from the administration, and even though there at that time, and this is 1989, this is almost 30 years ago, there was support, but the preparation for your colleagues and those that you will come to work with, what is their understanding? And for those who may know state government, part of the idea is you wait your turn, you take an exam, you get a position, you know, and hopefully if you score within a band of 3 high enough, you may get selected and appointed for a position. There were a few of us who had been in state government, and I myself was already working for the state when I came here, but that thinking for some of the folks meant that you were jumping ahead. You were not waiting your turn. But when you think about trying to address discriminatory practices in hiring, that you can't go, if you go the order, you will never be able to address it. You must be radical and think differently of how you bring someone into your program area, into your employment, into your institution. And it doesn't mean that they're coming with less skills. It doesn't mean they're coming with less knowledge. It means that because you're the way you have operated or the institution has operated, you have to make some changes or adjustment in how that person enters. And that's not always understood. It's not always explained clearly from my opinion perspective. And it's not always valued because there's some gaps and some in terms of the understanding that if a change is desired, it needs some consistent radical adjustments that you're willing to do and to see through in order to get the kind of change and representation that you say you want in the end.
Right. See, somebody, I just wanted to follow up with you really quick. That was really helpful. Do you have maybe I don't know if you saw one of these, as you describe it, radical changes that actually worked, or a place that did this well? I'm sort of curious if you saw some successes.
I think I didn't see it there. I was going through, actually, we did an assessment in the year that I came in to the program, because the program lasted 4 years. But in the third year, they changed and they went internal. They selected the candidates for the fellowship who were already within the department. But I think some of the things we had learned was the exposure of the individuals coming in, because some people were coming outside of state government. So to some degree, you had to learn state government, because now you're in the midst of this new environment. And not to have that information, not to have that part of your basic training, put you at a disadvantage in terms of how you're in what the fellow needed to know and understand, and how to navigate this system of state government was one of the things I think we realized they needed to do a better job. Although they had some training, they did have some things that were working, but I think that preparation of the fellow combined with the preparation of the department to receive the fellows were some of the things that needed to have been done better.
Great. I see, Dylan, why don't you go ahead and put it posted here? You have a question?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Absolutely. Great.
Okay. The only question I have, and this is it's actually ironic, but the point she brought up is kind of something that I don't want to say I had a point of contention with, but I guess I'm just wondering, like, from your perspective, like, you know, you said you have like John Doe come up and then some other guy, they both apply for the job. Like, what level of the state process is the race being implicated with the actual hiring? What I mean by that is, like, if you see 2 test scores and you just see 2 guys' names and you have no way to infer, you know, any kind of racial, let's just say they're, you know, completely regular, whatever. How are you, like, where are they making the factor, okay, this guy's of this descent, this guy's of this, well, we're going to get rid of him? Because if it's just, like I said, if you're just seeing 2 test scores, I don't see where I guess the racism part of it's coming in, I guess.
You're not always, from my experience, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have jumped in. Was that a question for me?
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I just wanted to be sure.
No, you're fine.
You know, it wasn't always just test scores. You could bring people in for interviews. Individuals have taken exams, and they're people who are already working in that particular department, or they're working in that office area. So you know the individuals. So it's not totally blind in the sense of you're solely looking at a test score. And also what I learned in my years of working with the department and also being in a management position, there are a multitude of ways to hire someone within civil service. It's not just what you score on that test. There were ways to promote someone. within a certain grade area, within a 2-grade upgrade, they would call. There are other, because civil service has, I think we used to joke and say, you know, like 20,000 different rules that could be applied. And it's understanding that and knowing that. But sometimes some of those things were not used when they could be used. And not all positions required the results of an exam. You could do a provisional appointment. So there were things that could be done to begin to address the discrepancy factors and the gap. And it was not always considered where it could have been.
So by extension of that, now this is kind of where we're at because of that,
Mm-hmm.
more or less. Okay. Okay.
Right, right. Not used and not giving opportunities where you could have extended it. And I think you raise an important question, if I may, because, you know, sometimes that's the thought behind it, that you're, again, it's affirmative action or you're giving somebody a special compensation, and that's not the case. These things have been used for other folks who don't look like me. They've always been used.
Right.
And so when someone asks for them about someone of color, then it becomes, sometimes that's when it becomes an issue, but it's not new. It's not a brand new approach, and it's not a brand new option. And so that's where I think some of the things we needed to consider.
Right. And that makes complete sense. And then if I could just add to that, I guess the other thing is that, because I wholeheartedly like embrace and I understand like the mentality behind why. I mean, I don't understand it because obviously I'm white. I don't know. I mean, but it just seems like, I don't know how to put it, but it just seems like we're getting into a dangerous place where it's like, from my perspective, I'm trying to way to put this. It's the only way. It seems like we're drawing so many distinctions by saying, like, or a lot of people are like, okay, well, this guy's of this, we got to embrace this dissent, or, you know what I mean? There's so many different types of people that really, it seems like, I don't know if this makes sense, but you're almost like just furthering the distinctions among people. Like, you are this, you are that, this makes you this, you're that. But really, aren't we all the same? I mean, it's like, at the end of the day, shouldn't we be trying to, I don't want to say like homogenous, you know what I mean? But like, it seems like you're just drawing further distinctions among classes or races of people, and you're just creating more, or not you, but as a society, we're creating more tiers. And it seems like it's just getting like, I don't want to even say like derivative, but it just seems like when does it get to a point where like, I don't know, like, I want to say enough's enough, but like, it just seems, I don't know, I guess the best way I can put it is, it seems like we're just further, there's a point where it seems healthy, and then there's a point where it's like, okay, now we're just talking about what makes us different. And I don't think necessarily talking about what makes everybody different is always healthy. I guess I don't know if that makes any sense or not.
Sorry, Pedro, go ahead. You wanted to speak to this, and then Jim, I saw your hand up. You can go after Pedro.
Dylan's point, but then let's go back a bit. Affirmative action was a program designed specifically to try to redress systematic, institutionalized violence and racism against certain populations in the United States. These are essentially African American, Native Americans, Filipinos, Asian Americans, Mexicans, and Puerto Ricans. Each of these populations made significant contributions to the development of this country. So it was an effort to recognize that these populations had been systematically discriminated against historically. And it was a recognition by society that there was a need to redress this, at least to provide a level playing ground. Now, over time, because of persistent, continuous attack by sectors of the white population that thought they were being disadvantaged, this has been moderated and transformed to something called diversity, some very light, almost subaferic meaning of what it is. Inclusion, bring anyone who's different than others. But again, the presumption is that whiteness is the norm and everything else is different and consequently not normal. And by bringing it in, somehow that creates an environment that's conducive to talking across particular racial groups. So for me, the real danger is not, I mean, Dylan says, you did. I mean, this is an institutional response. It was in the interest of the institution to promote affirmative action during a certain historical moment. And that's what it was. over time, as a consequence of persistent legal and political attacks against the concept of affirmative action, that was transformed to the idea that you're undeserving. It's only because of your color that you're getting something, rather than recognizing that there are historical factors that make clear why there are differential levels of achievements among different racialized groups. So now we talk about diversity as if diversity itself seeks to redress what is continued institutionalized racism and white supremacy, and it doesn't. Those are some comments for, I guess, reflection.
Right. Jim, and I think you, for some reason I can't unmute you, Jim. You got to do it yourself. There you go.
A couple of responses I've been sort of thinking about while listening. One, the problem's not new, as people have alluded to it. In the 2017, 18, the university began to talk a fair amount about the need to sort of make the entire university at Albany faculty and staff more diverse. And around the same time, the SUNY Faculty Senate released a report on diversity in the SUNY campuses. And it showed that across the system, between 1995 and a 20-year period, between 1995 and 2015, African-American and Latino, those are two categories I happen to sort of just focus on, and they were represented in the report also, increased from something like 3.5% to 4% of faculty in the system to, let's say, 4.2%. That was a very, very, very small increase over that 20-year period. And that was not unusual in Albany. Albany was not an outlier. The centers were that way, and most of the colleges were also. And at the same time, the number of female faculty in the same 20 period has shown a significant increase. And those are things having to do with gender and class that operate differently in terms of promoting people to sort of university positions. And I think that's just, I guess what I'm hearing makes me think somehow, given our sort of scant resources and our scattered lives, which other people have spoken to, the way we feel alone, we have to find some way of having a strategic view of what kind of change we want and realizing it's a long haul. If you're talking about systemic change of institutions, it's going to take a very long time. Unless there's some kind of upheaval that we don't yet know. But if we're talking about things at the University at Albany, I would hope that in its own way, given its scant resources, the union chapter could offer one kind of way of grounding such an effort together with departments. I do know, just from the speaking of my own, with the sort of limited experience with my own department, and that's largely through Zoom meetings for the last 6 months, the faculty are aware that there are problems of the relationship between a predominantly, overwhelmingly sort of Euro-American or white faculty and students of color, as well as staff of color. And so our graduate affairs committee, as well as are going to be trying to sort of work and meet separately with both students of color and our staff. So I think there's a lot of willingness, there's a lot of recognition by people who normally don't think about white privilege. Oh, and I'd come back to Dylan's point with just that. I mean, I think the thing that we sort of all desire for a better world is we can recognize common humanity across the lines that divide. But that doesn't mean those lines haven't been there for a long time. And, that in this, I came from a very poor background and was able to get a college education. And that's a great thing. But I also recognize that in various points in my life, I had advantages that African-American people around me did not have, or that Native American people around me did not have in work sites, and so forth. So, I mean, I think white privilege as a kind of structure of advantage in the US is real. And we live in an institution which is majority white in terms of its sort of professional and faculty staff. And that is, changing that is going to be a long-term project. There's small things there are things we can start doing now. And thankfully, I think some departments, including my own, are moving in that direction. But the bigger questions that Pedro pointed to in terms of institutional budgets and SUNY as a system, that's a whole other thing for people to get their arms around, or us to get our arms around. I just want to say that as somebody who's interested in this project. That's why I came to this meeting today. I didn't need another Zoom meeting. I've got 2.5 hours in about 2 hours, but I think this is an important conversation. So I want to hear what people say, and I'll pipe down. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Next time we'll do it on Microsoft Teams, change it up a little bit. So I actually want to come back to, there was some interesting sort of couple of comments went back and forth in the chat that really go back to something that Idalia had raised earlier on, and then I'm going to try to pick up a thread that's coming out of this conversation too. But Mary had made a point about sort of how do we build these support networks, sort of not just on our own campus, but outside the campus in the larger community. And Alycia, you had a sort of a response to that, and I would be curious if you wanted to elaborate on that for folks who either just didn't catch it in the chat, or to speak to that a bit more, and particularly like, what is it that we can do as, say, members of the campus community, right? Or to Jim's point, more specifically, as a union chapter, to help build those connections, right? So that we're not just doing the work to create those supports on our own campus, but whatever we can do to build those larger community supports. I'm just curious if you wanted to elaborate on that.
Yeah, so I took a note. As far as like hiring, when you hire people from different backgrounds, I feel like sometimes the consideration stops with getting those people in the door and kind of meeting that quota, but you don't actually make space for those people within that environment. So if the environment was not inclusive or not inviting or hostile before, you're setting those people up to fail kind of, because they're coming in, they might come from different experiences, different backgrounds. I'm personally a non-traditional student. I finished my bachelor's degree at 29 and started my master's at 30. So like my experiences in undergrad and sometimes as a master's student have been challenging because I'm not in my early 20s. I'm also working internships and doing different things. So sometimes we don't consider like how we want those people who are different to come in, but then we want to have them squeeze into the box that we've already set up and established before. But then those people aren't going to fit those boxes because they're not part of that mold. And if we want to have spaces that are going to be naturally more inclusive moving forward, then we need to consider how can the space be more reflective of the people we want to bring in and have them kind of grow and foster in that community.
Right.
Can I add something?
Please, yeah, Idalia, go ahead.
Well, I'm just thinking, listening and thinking of all these as a big, it's a cultural change. It's not like something that a little group of people are going to be able to, we can hope that we can make a difference, but it's the cultural change on not just, in the nation, but in the campus. So if you're, and think about who is this benefiting also. We have had students who have never seen a Black person and another Black student. We have students that come from very rural areas and never been in contact. So, and we are preparing, as a university, are preparing the students to be out in the world that doesn't look at all to what they have learned, growing up. So I think that it's our responsibility to prepare them for that, and based on that assumption, on that premise, that I think that is our responsibility to create a culture that is more like what is out there. But also, back to the point of the support, this is essential. You can bring 20 people every year, but if you don't have the support and something like I said before, as simple as where do you go? How are the schools around? We are in a very rural area. Our campus is in a village, and a white village, and so if you have had people come in and we don't have that campus a commitment. It cannot be just, like I said, we were a group of just the faculty staff of color, which kept dwindling every year, less and less people. So if it falls on those people also to be the support for these incoming new faculty and staff, it's going to fail. So it has to be a culture in the campus. It has to be a commitment from the whole campus, not just the few here and the affirmative action or the diversity and inclusion department, which in our case is one person half-time. So it can fall on one person. It cannot fall in one little group. It has to be a campus commitment and a campus culture change. So to be more inclusive and more, and understand why we're bringing it. It's not just a quota. It's not just, we're bringing them because we want to be reflective of what we have around us, what they, you know, the world that we live in. And I think that that should be enough to, you know, this is a responsibility to teach the students, to prepare the students to be out there in the world that doesn't look like them. So I just wanted to add that.
Great, thank you. Does anyone else want to speak to this point or have sort of thoughts on particularly ways people have been, if there's been successes in helping to forge those connections or build those supports? It struck me in listening to both Pedro and Debora just talk about their own experiences with the various sort of programs that were in place, that something that was common to both is that, and I'm sure this is true, not just of New York state government, but these kinds of policies in general, is that they tend to just, you know, they emerge, they're in existence for a few years, then they go away, then it's a new program, and that program is around for a few years, and that one goes away. And so, whereas on the other hand, when we're talking about shifting cultures and community support, we're talking about something that requires a much longer term commitment and consistency. And so anyway, I just sort of throw that out there as an observation, and I don't know, is the challenge then to focus more on doing that kind of internal cultural work and then just, you know, get what you can from the kind of the policy side in terms of those, whatever those intentional programs are. How do those two things fit together? And sort of throw that out there if anybody wants to bite.
This is
Pedro,
Pedro.
please.
I don't want to dominate the conversation, but I mean, the couple of issues here implicit in this is a notion that the marginalized communities, the racialized communities, bear the responsibility of promoting inclusion and diversity within the institution. It's not that way at all. It has to be the institution's realization that either it's going to participate in the system that systematically marginalize these populations, or it radically alters the mechanisms through which it recruits people and nurtures people and allows them to develop professionally. Because the political pressure can be brought to bear for an institution to make short-term corrective measures to respond to political crisis. But that's not going to generate institutional transformation over time. And even having, quote, minority in positions of authority with an institution that continues to abide by what is the preservation of white supremacy isn't going to change anything, right? So ultimately, it has to be the administration's leadership that makes a determination and acknowledges the fact they are duplicitous in the system that sustains, right, this marginalization. I wrote a letter to the president of Provost about a year ago, looking at what Latino and Black faculty numbers were 20 years ago. And the increases have been marginal. In aggregate terms, there has been a slight increase, but in percentage terms, virtually nothing. So even the Prodigy program is talking about hiring 100 faculty. That sounds like a large number, but it's over 10 years, right? Or 1,000 faculty, that's over 10 years over how many campuses you mentioned earlier. That's not going to make a change. So it's not simply colorizing the faculty. It's a question of rethinking what the responsibility of the university is to these populations that have historically been underrepresented in higher education, as well as virtually all centers of power in our society.
Anyone want to respond to Pedro before I?
I don't know if this is directly to Pedro or the larger question of that we're talking about creating an environment conducive to growth. I think the way Alycia put it was really nice. It really is creating infrastructure, and I agree. We keep doing this political Band-Aid thing, and that's never going to work if we don't create the environment that will allow growth. And I keep thinking of Kevin Costner, is it Kevin Costner? Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. We keep bringing people, throwing them in, but not giving them a place to grow. I think this also would really benefit international, not just students, but when we bring international scholars to campus, and all faculty, staff, and students at all levels. And that intersectionality, I think, will contribute exponentially to the kind of environmental conditions that are desirable. Does that make sense? I mean, I think we have to think beyond just hiring X type of people, whatever type of people, bringing X amount of diverse graduate students or staff or faculty, and really thinking about operationally how we all function together.
Yeah, Deborah, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you. I agree with Elaine. I agree with so much that's been said, but I think there has to be actual spaces of dialogue that we don't have on a regular basis. I think learning how, for example, nonviolent communication strategies or something where we can actually start having dialogues where we trust each other and can really, you know, on a regular basis sort of work these things out sort of in a, you know, goal would be non-judgmental. But, you know, I mean, I think there has to be spaces where people can dialogue, and I think we need to create it. I don't think it's going to happen from the top down. I think we could create it. We can do Zoom, we can do lots of different things, but I do think the spaces of dialogue has to be critical, and it has to be non-judgmental. I'm taking nonviolent communication training. I think it's been great. They're working pretty hard, that group, it seems, to integrate all of these concerns. So just a thought.
Great, thank you. So one question I wanted to put to really everyone here is, as I've been thinking about some of the examples that you've given about, you know, and maybe this also comes back in a way to the conversation that Dylan started, which is this question of how we deal with the kind of the intentionality that needs to go into actually promoting, you know, let's just say, you know, as Pedro said, that word diversity has kind of become a sort of a catch-all, and it has a kind of a soft, you know, kind of mushy feeling. So let's just say promoting real diversity or real racial equity on a campus or in any workplace that requires a lot of intentionality. And I'm curious what people's perspective is on how we do that intentionality in our current moment. And I think of that current moment in two ways. One is where the question of race and racial justice is now prominent, right? And it's something that's clearly sparked this conversation that we're having now and all around the country and around the world. And clearly sort of opens the door for some, you know, positive change, but it also then, as we've seen, created space for backlash, right? Which I think when Pedro was describing, you know, the experience, you know, his experience, right? If I understood the story correctly, part of what prompted the change in the SUNY program was this sense of backlash against a previous set of affirmative action policies. And I believe, Debora, you spoke to this as well, too, that, you know, when you engage in these kinds of intentional efforts to address systemic inequality, you inevitably confront this kind of backlash. Well, why you, but why not me? So that's one part of the current moment. And then the other part is one where resources have been scarce for years. They are going to be, scarce isn't even the right word, right? So you know, to be intentional at a time when everybody is feeling anxious about their own security, about their own futures. It just seems like a potent mix. And so I'm curious if I sort of put that out there as, you know, how do we address these long-standing issues, but in the present moment? Curious if anybody wants to take a stab at that one. Jim. Oh, sorry. Or Alycia, why don't you go ahead? You're unmuted, and then Jim, yeah.
I was just going to say, I'd like to just see some, just trying some different things, because it seems sometimes like in academia or just in society at large that we have places that are like, we do this way, that's the way that we've always done it. And so there's not even that room, even if we're talking about like changing things up, sometimes the environment can feel kind of stagnant. One example would be like 2 semesters ago, I personally decided that I was going to go paperless. So I bought an iPad, and one of my teachers gave me a lot of pushback. They didn't want me to use that in class. I made the argument that it was environmentally more conscious, and it also just reduced my, it saved my back from carrying a ton of things with me all the time. I get all my books on there, and it's very efficient and easy. But that's not what she was comfortable with. She liked paper. She liked being able, like, to be in control, have everyone looking at each other, not at any screen. So that's like one trade-off. Okay, you're in control of the room and the conversation, but you're not allowing me to use my agency as an adult who's able to look at a computer and also be still involved with the conversation that's going around. And then now look at where we are. We're all meeting on computers, and everything is just about virtual. So there just wasn't that room for a conversation of, hey, and it wasn't receptive. So I just think that if the people who have the power to kind of make choices are willing to consider different things, even if there isn't necessarily tons of research, just being able to try different things than maybe what they're comfortable with.
All right, thanks. Jim? Okay. Yeah, I mean, another way I could sort of put this is, you know, in a moment where, you know, Pedro, you sort of suggested or alluded to the, like, for example, the Prodigy program, which again is the new SUNY initiative to hire diverse faculty, right? Whatever the numbers they're throwing out. I mean, let's be frank, the reality is they are not, let alone hiring 100, you know, faculty of color. They're not going to hire 100 faculty, period, right, over the next couple of years. And so this is going to present new challenges, right? And so how do we continue to kind of push the, you know, move the needle, right, make these changes in an environment where not only are resources thin, but as I said, you know, a lot of people are going to be clamoring for those resources. And those could be things that we should be doing not only in our own workspaces, but in the broader community, right? How do we perhaps open up possibilities for this change in an environment that seems where possibilities are limited right now?
If I can, you know, just offer a point, I think how much will it take to change culture? How much money I'm talking about? I mean, how much does it take to be welcoming to, you know, from the top, bottom, you know, let's talk. Now, you know, I keep saying that this pandemic has been like a blessing in disguise, because we are able to reach, I mean, I wouldn't have been able to come to Albany to, you know, to present, to talk to you guys. And actually this sparked me an idea to, a lot of what we're missing as a chapter, as a community, I'm sorry, as a committee, is data. So it sparked me an idea to do this kind of a regional, you know, listening tour. Like, you know, let's set up a Zoom meeting, which everybody is doing nowadays, and let's talk. You know, what do you need? How can we help you? You know, how much does that really take in money? But the culture it's, you know, of being more welcoming, listening to all each other, and not just leave it on, you know, our few, you know, the few that stayed, you to support each other, but that is a campus-wide effort. How much would that really take? And I think that is, I'm very hopeful. We have a gentleman, new president that is from, Africa, from, I don't remember where he's from, but, black man. And so we're hoping to start conversations and see, what is he going to do about these cultures? Because unfortunately, if you bring somebody to the department and the department is not welcoming, you're not doing much. So, but how much money that really takes? It's going to that it has to be personal and it has to be from everybody, not just the few of us. So I think that, if you think of term of money to recruit, well, why don't we take care of the ones that we have already and see making the campuses more welcoming and see, maybe they will come, like the previous speaker said, if you build it, they will come. If you make the campus more welcoming, maybe, you will have better luck keeping the ones that are, that we recruit and the ones that we have already on campus. So I don't know how much money that would take, but I think that personal effort, it should be something that is easier to do than having to, come up with a lot of money for programming, things like that. So I don't know. I think that everything that to me big changes, money, it is a barrier, but it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be the only thing that we need to do that. So, a commitment and make it campus-wide, not just for the few.
Right. I'm wondering, I could check here, but if I could invite maybe Sandy, if you wanted to speak a bit, and I know Deborah, you're involved in the Poor People's Campaign as well, about some of the work that's going on to try to, push back against this idea that, given the crisis that we're in right now, sort of the health crisis and the economic crisis, to try to push back against, the way in which this could close off opportunities for progressive change, right? We sort of know how these moments of crisis can just lead to really harsh austerity measures being imposed that just lead people to say, well, this would be great if we could do it, but we can't because we can't afford it right now, right? And so, I don't know, put you on the spot a bit, but let us know sort of what's going on in the wider community and how we can help do that. Because I think that's one thing we've talked about today, is that it's not just going to happen, on our own campuses and in our own work sites.
So yeah, let me just talk briefly. I'm out in the tent. I don't know how good my reception is and my wavelength here, but thank you for allowing me to listen in. And one of the things that I do in addition to being the Protestant campus minister here at U Albany is to be part of the Poor People's Campaign. And I think I talked to all of you a couple of years ago when we were launching this. But the campaign is doing, I think in essence, what you've been doing today, trying to change the narrative of what's going on in our world by changing the narrator, by listening to the people who are most impacted by what's happening in our culture, in our society, particularly around racism, poverty, militarism, ecological devastation. And so obviously that those challenges have become even more intense in this time of COVID. Things are still happening though. We're still moving ahead, and in some ways we were primed for this and ready to address it because we already knew before problems. And so I just want to let you know that if you haven't checked out the Poor People's Campaign website, do so, particularly the New York Poor People's Campaign website. And one of the beauties of, all going online is that the Poor People's Assembly, which happens in October 16 to 18, is going to be online. So no matter where you are, you can join us. You don't have to travel anywhere. Sometimes we had to travel to Buffalo or something. Sharing this information, so screenshot it. The registration deadline is next week, Monday, or is that Tuesday? Anyway, next week. Go on and just fill out your application. Even if you can only make bits and pieces of it, I think it's good to be aware of how your narrative fits into the bigger narrative of the capital region and the state. Thanks.
Great, thanks.
Deborah may have something to add. I'm not sure. Deborah's part of this too.
Yeah, and I saw Matthew, you raised your hand. So, but yeah, Deborah, did you want to speak to this as well?
I think Sandy pretty much covered it. I think I'm finding it a little tricky figuring out how to participate as much as I'd like to. So maybe we could make a bigger effort, Sandy, to clue us in more. So yeah, no, it's great. I've been to different marches and different events and things, but I'd like us to create more sustained connection. Thanks.
Yeah. Let's see. Okay, Matthew, you had your hand up. Here, I'll take this down so I can see everybody again.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment quickly as well to piggyback off of Sandy. I followed up with one of the emails previously right at the start of COVID regarding to one of the book club with Poor People's Campaign. And I've since done a number of the monthly calls and attended a couple events. And again, I agree that I think the message and the messaging is hugely helpful. It's hugely helpful for changing the way that I think people both in our community and outside of our community can attack some of these issues. I was reading a Times Union article this morning just about some of the cuts that are going on to our local public schools. Namely Schenectady, which is, the high school is a mile down the street from me, Albany as well. And it sort of triggered the idea that how does the University of Albany sort of bridge the gap between public institutions of all types to bring light of how this austerity will crush a lot of people in the state, and they're going to crush the people who are going to have the least ability to combat the austerity measures. So how do we work with Albany Public School? And maybe we're doing this, and I don't know, but how do we work with Schenectady and Albany? How do we work with the public hospitals that are going to lose funding? How do we work with state agencies or local agencies that provide mental health counseling? What are the impacts of those? I think there are things that we can.
Are you here for snacks? Bible study's going to be at 2.
Cause on our own campus, I think, as far as that goes. And sorry, I'll do one more before I stop talking. I also think as well, when speaking about racism and white supremacy and diversity and those types of things, I think, with family and friends and things along those lines, making the point that this is not an individual thing, that it isn't a larger systemic thing, and being able to have one or two talking points about that is of great impact, because I myself might not be overtly racist, but the way that I participate and interact with society perpetuates certain outcomes. And I think being able to realize those outcomes and speak towards those outcomes will help us break down some of those barriers, again, on our own campus and outside.
Great, thanks. Does anybody want to speak to Matthew's comments? Or to anything else that was recently said? Yeah, go ahead, Deborah, yeah.
Deborah, I just wanted to speak a little to Matthew and to Idalia. I think the changing the narrative and having the conversations, I don't think those things can be minimized. And it's not about money. You don't have to have money to have the conversation, to have the exposure and the experience with someone other than who looks like you or in your family. I think one of the things that's happening with this pandemic, and I think with the George Floyd situation, that harkens back my mind to the civil rights in the 60s, that people across the country are seeing firsthand what segments of the population have been experiencing, and see it up front. In the civil rights movement, they saw it with the water hose and the dogs. Here they saw a man with a knee on his neck and police looking nonchalant as it's happening. They're seeing these things over and over. They're seeing, you know, a 17-year-old walk with a gun across his chest. They see folks going and say, so people are seeing this, and what we would want to happen, that it resonates in their mind that something is happening somewhere else. I may not experience every day, but somebody's experiencing this. And why are they experiencing this? Why is it that that this is part of their life, you know, and that it's not anything necessarily they have done? And so those that doesn't require any money, and that's something that can be done in an office. It can be done in your community. It can be done in your church, in your place of worship, but it's understanding what's happening across this country, across the world, but across this country in terms of people's lives. And I think when you talk about what I hear when I hear that word intentional is that folks have to say, this is what we're going to do. You know, it's not happenstance. It's not going to be coincidental. It's not going to be that, you know, because somebody else did something. This is what I'm going to do to make a difference, to make a change, and actively go and make that happen. I think that's something that we all have to think about. And I think that's something that in the Poor People's Campaign, that I'm fairly new to the group, but that's one of the things that I'm hearing across this resonating with me as we're looking at, even in this pandemic, what's happening with people, frontline workers, or people who are poor, who are Black and brown, you know, who could not afford to lose their job. So sometimes are more likely put at risk to be able to go out and make sure and serve other people. There are folks who are being, you know, when the rules are lifted about being evicted from your home, who's going to be evicted because they cannot afford, because they truly were one paycheck away from losing everything. It is understanding that and taking the action that's necessary for you to be able to do something. And my last point is one of the things that I hear, I hearken back to hearing Dr. Cornel West at a speech he had done at Siena a number of years, that happening is that when white America understands and acknowledge that they have benefited from the oppression of other people. You may not, individuals and people have said, you know, your family may not have owned slaves or enslaved people, but because someone did, and because of the decisions and the policies and the practices they put in place, you have benefited from the action of those things. And change and things can happen. At the end of the day, you may be giving up something, but understand that that's going to have to happen, because we can't say, well, we're going to all start at the beginning now, because someone has already had an advancement. You've already had an advancement over a group of people. So they're not going to catch up, you know, in a short amount of time. It's not going to happen. You have to be intentional in terms of the action and the activities that are going to take place.
Yeah, I'd just like to say thank you so much for that, Sarah. I've never met you before, but I have to say what you're saying for me really resonates as a white woman. If I'm not at the front of that line taking this on, it's not your responsibility. You know, it's really mine because of all the privileges that I've had. And this has been really a challenge as a faculty member to try to lead these kinds of conversations and race-based caucusing and really bringing the students in and challenging people to think much more deeply about the history of oppression and white supremacy in this country. And I think, Aaron, just your question a long time ago, white faculty have to be at the front of this. If we're not, I'm just, you know, I don't see everybody's faces, but I'm just looking at the screen and wondering, where are all my colleagues in terms of who's stepping forward? And I think we have to hold each other accountable for that in new and important ways that, frankly, I've been able to slide
I can live in my nice house and I don't worry when my son goes out in the morning that he's going to die before he gets home that day. I can forget for 24 hours or 48 hours. And I have to change that mindset for myself. So thank you for what you've said. I really appreciate it. And I just want to hold myself accountable every day.
Right. Thanks, Mary. Jim, go ahead.
I'd like to sort of speak somewhat in opposition to a couple of previous remarks. With regard to what Matthew said, I think it's very important, and I think he brought out well, that you don't want to sort of individualize the sense of white privilege. White privilege is systemic. Racism is systemic. And I think one of the things that kind of most impedes Americans generally is that we often think of racism as a matter of individual intentions. But that doesn't define a social structure. That doesn't define a system. And I do not think that the way to advance a discussion of reparations for racial your stuff. This is a societal problem. It's a governmental problem. If we want, as Hannah Nicole Barry wrote in the New York Times about a month and a half ago in an eloquent argument for reparations for slavery, she said, this is not an individual obligation. This is the obligation of American society. American society has to commit to these goals. That means all of us. And I would strongly suggest that if we don't get something like a very far left democratic regime, what Aaron and a few people refer to as the pushback, the right-wing mobilization is going to be more severe. If we can try and work to move toward a society that has more money flowing, so people are not being evicted, so they're not out of jobs, so they're not living lives of desperation as well as demoralization, we have less, we have a chance of stopping the really ugly business of armed ultra-right militia who are very active in this country from becoming more active. And I think that's kind of politics at the national level. There's nothing the UU Albany chapter can do other than sort of organize petition signing and so forth at that level. But I think we all have to think to act politically. We have to feel locally, we have to communicate with empathy, and we also have to think historically and socially about what we're up against. And what we're up against is not just, people who failed to be good white allies. What we're up against is a system of law and property and inherited inequality. And that's going to take governmental action.
And I would not disagree with that. And I think with that, though, I would say there is an individual responsibility in everything, okay? No, you're not the reason why I might be struggling in something. But if an issue comes before you, as in terms of voting, in terms of an action that you have to take, you have to think about how you're going to respond to that. That's what I mean in terms of individual. There's an individual role for all of us on how we interact with other people who don't look like us, who may not be in the same economic situation as we are in, who may be dealing with challenges. We have to look at how do we think when we see that, and what do we think we can do to address or assist in remedying a situation. So I don't disagree with you in terms of the system and the systemic, but I don't want us to walk away thinking that we have to just say it's the government, as if we're not part of the government, as if we don't have a responsibility in our day-to-day lives to look at how we interact and act and react.
Great. Thanks so much for that. I'm gonna sort of try to bring us towards a conclusion here, just to be mindful of people's time, and as people are going to be leaving the meeting, I just want to make sure I point us to a couple of things. As Jim just said, we define, or others have said, we define spaces to keep this conversation going, and so there's a few that immediately come to mind. For those of you that are on the meeting that are UUP folks, part of the chapter, part of the U Albany membership. We have a I guess I'm still getting the name change, but we have our own internal Black and faculty and staff concerns committee. And if you are interested in participating in that, we rely on just the members of our campus to keep these conversations going through these. This is a way to help keep this conversation going. I'm going to put my Gmail address in the chat box now. Just reach out to me directly. Hey, I'm interested in, and even better is if you say, hey, I'm interested in, and I've got a colleague who might be interested in too, and I'm going to invite them to participate. So I'd like to, that committee, quite frankly, has been a little fallow on our campus or in our chapter, and so I'd love to see that sort of repopulated with some new energy. You saw already. Well, actually, before I move on, I should also say, since I'm looking at Idalia right now, that of course feeds directly into the statewide Black and Latino Faculty Staff Concerns Committee, and so that is another great way to participate. Even if you're not an elected delegate, you can still participate in these statewide committees. Idalia, I don't know if you want to just speak to what some of the work that your group does.
Well, actually, I wanted to piggyback with what you were saying about your campus committee, because that has been one of our goals. It's been to reach out to campuses, because we have a committee like it's 40 people, but really a third of the committee is from one campus. So we really want to reach out to every campus, and if there's this kind of committees on campuses already, we actually want to connect with those. And if they do not exist in the campus, we want our chapters to then initiate some kind of I don't know, a committee or we want to hear from our members on campuses or from our minority members. And so if there's a committee already or a group on campus, we want to interact and reach out to them. But if not, then we want the campus chapter, to do something about it. But we definitely, our goals, that is actually one of our strategic goals, and it has been very difficult because it has to be, like I said, our committee doesn't have representation from all campuses, and so that is actually a thing that we're going to be trying to reach. I think that there's a letter already that is going to go out from Fred, so we're going to have to reach out to the campus chapter presidents and to reach out to these committees. But definitely we want to engage in conversations. And like I said before, with our listening tours, I think that this will be a good way to promote it with those groups on campuses. We want to hear from them. We definitely. Unfortunately, one of the things that we have been struggling for since I've been in this committee, probably 20 years, is data. We don't have, SUNY doesn't give us the data that we need. We don't know how many Black or Latinos, or we don't have that information. So we have to rely on our members to give us the information we need. So, so communicating with those groups directly, if they exist already, the better. But if not, the chapters, we will encourage them to do, to reach committee, whatever they want to call it. But definitely we want to hear from everybody. Great.
That's really helpful. Thanks. So yeah, please do reach out to me. Like I said, if you're interested in participating, you have colleagues, friends on campus, that I would really love to hear that. Anybody who's a UUP member, get involved. And then we also, heard a bit towards the end from Sandy about the work that the Poor People's Campaign is doing. I think, I've been trying to sort of follow and participate when I can and share information, but this I think is another great way to make those connections from our own campus to the wider community and to have those things inform each other. I hope that, more people here will check out what's going on in the New York State chapter. They do a lot of great work. And more importantly, too, you find out about some of these important events and actions that are happening. So the other thing you can do too is our UUP chapter, we maintain a list of sort of political activists. You try not to send too much kind of political action stuff over the mass email, but if you want to participate in that kind of work and get those announcements, just email me and I'll add you to that list, that same email address that's there. And so, you know, that'll, for example, the action that Sandy posted about, the one on Saturday, I just sent an announcement about that to our group. There's actually two on Saturday. There's a car caravan and that 12:30, and then a sort of an in-person rally at 4:30. So if you want to participate in either or both of those, find out more about that. That's great. And then Deborah Brown Johnson, I don't want to put you on the spot because I didn't ask you beforehand, but how do folks, if they're interested, sort of learn more about what's going on at Albany NAACP or possibly get involved? Is there a mechanism for that, or how should people approach that if they want to or are interested?
Yes, we hold monthly meetings, and actually on tomorrow, Thursday, we're having a youth Why You Vote, and it's a panel made of youth between the ages of 18 to 35 to talk about voting and the issues impacting their voting in the 2020 elections and the past elections. They can reach out to me. I'll give you my email address. I can put it online on the chat box.
Great.
And individuals who's interested in joining us can reach out to me. Thank you.
Great. And then Alycia, for folks, particularly, you know, graduate students, you know, how do they stay in touch with the work that GSEU is doing on this, or other graduate student groups that might help them connect with issues that are going on in terms of, you know, workplace justice, racial equity, racial justice? What do you think is a good way to help sort of connect graduate students to this work?
Well, as far as reaching out to the GSEU, I don't know if Sarah Applehands is still on here, but
I think she is, yeah.
A great person to contact. My email address is abacon@albany.edu, so I can also be reached. There's an Office of Diversity and Inclusion that's in the campus center, and they do a lot of really good work. I think it's Ekbao King that's in charge of that. So they have events and stuff. There's a Graduate Students of Color group that does a lot of really cool kind of get-togethers and different things. And I would also just encourage anyone that is looking to be a part of movement. The People's Campaign, Poor People's Campaign sounds really awesome. And I know Sandy, but also just kind of looking for opportunities to talk to people in your environment that are not people that you would normally talk to, people that are different, people of color, and just try to, like, don't necessarily reach out to them having them to like educate you, but just, you know, connect with them just like human beings and ask how they are and like make those conversations. I feel like that's where the work gets done, when people can kind of see each other as just people. We're all going through the same things as far as, especially with COVID-19, everyone in the world is going through something kind of similar. So just kind of building that community is where we do have the most power to eventually try to turn the hand of the government to make the changes that are needed for us to have a better society.
Great.
Long answer.
No, that's perfect. Thank you. And I'll just say for myself, as I said at the start of this meeting, I really do hope that we can use the chapter to really help promote the work that others are doing, but also just connect, more importantly, connect. I think that was sort of part of the point that Alycia was making, is we got to make these real human connections with each other. And so I'm happy, I'm eager, I'm excited to get those messages that say, you know, hey, Aaron, I'm with such and such. Do you want to help us promote this event, or, you know, participate in this event? Please do help us make those connections. I hope it'll be easier to do if we can help get some of our committees up and running to help us sort of, you know, build those social networks that keep that going. But I hope we can create more of these spaces, as others have said, as we continue to move forward. So just being mindful of the time here, I'm gonna wrap things up. I wanna just sort of quickly go around the horn, as they say. I'll sort of go to order of view. Thanks, Deborah Brown Johnson, for being here. Thank you, Pedro Caban, for being here. Thank you, Idalia Torres. Thank you, Alycia Bacon. Sandy Damhoff, if you're still on, thank you so much for being here and participating. It's been really great for me, and I think for others as well, to get this kind of perspective. And I want to remind everybody, on incredibly short notice, to make time in your schedules to share some really thoughtful insights. So Thank you very much. If you have folks that wanted to be here but couldn't, missed it, it's been recorded. It's going to be posted later on today. It'll be public, so anybody can watch it. Folks that aren't part of the campus, I'll make sure to send you the information as well in case you want to share it. So thanks all. Have a great afternoon.
Aaron, can you share the chat with me also, because there's some good links in there. The chat itself.
The shot of the
chat, the chat window.
The chat.
Oh, the chat. Yes, I can. Yeah, I'll either share the chat, or what I'll do is I'll pull some of that information out, and so that it's a little bit more. I'll make a digest, you know, and so it's a, yeah. So also too, that way people who shared things that they may not want shared. So, but yeah, great idea. Thank you.
Oh, I just wanted to jump in. I'm sorry, I forgot the name of the lady from the NAACP. Do you have contact information that you can share?
Yeah, she posted her email address in the chat. So it's Deborah Brown Johnson. Yeah, it's a little bit ways up here. If you want, I don't know if you want to just post it again so it appears at the bottom of the list.
I'll do it again quickly. It's
okay.
I say quickly, but I'm technologically challenged.
There's no rush.
Yeah.
And there's also a SUNY chapter of the NAACP on campus. I don't know the name of the new president, but there is a chapter.
Okay.
I just put my email on there.
There it is. Yep.
Okay. Please reach out to me.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, you can't copy and paste from the chat, unfortunately. But like I said, I'll pull this material out when I post a video. I'll include it, you know, in like the description or something. So, yeah. All right. Take care, everybody. Thanks so much.
Where can we find the video that you're going to post?
Oh, it's a YouTube channel. So you just go to YouTube, and then it's UUP Albany teaching for racial. There it is. You just search. When you go to YouTube, search the UUP Albany Teaching for Racial Justice. And that has this video and then the material from yesterday as well. Okay. All right. Take care, everybody. Great to meet you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.